The chambers of the Galactic Council had always been quiet, an engineered kind of silence, the sort that came from walls layered in acoustic dampeners and air scrubbers tuned to perfection. But on that day, the silence was something else entirely. It was the kind that seeped into bones, that came before the storm. Ambassador Elias Monroe stood before the vast circular window that overlooked the gas giant Arun 9, the heart of Council space. The amber clouds roiled like molten brass below, reflecting the hollow light of a dying sun. Somewhere behind him, alien voices whispered, scaled throats, mandibles, and resonant hums blending into a low susurration of unease. It had been 47 hours since the destruction of Erebus Station. The feed had spread across every human colony within minutes. A civilian trade port in neutral orbit vaporized. 2,000 souls gone! The Council called it an incident, an unfortunate misunderstanding between patrol fleets. But humanity knew better. Erebus had been hit by a Grillian beam. No one fired. Grillian beams by mistake. Monroe had watched the recording. Too many times. The flash, the blossom of plasma. The sudden silence on all comm channels. His own wife, Dr. Catherine Monroe, had been on board for a diplomatic research exchange. Now, he stood alone beneath the banners of 12 alien civilizations, his reflection fractured across the transparent alloy. He could still hear the recording in his head, the static before the light consumed everything. Behind him, Counselor Tarak Vesson of the Grillian Dominion raised one of his segmented arms. "Ambassador Monroe," the alien hissed, his mandibles clicking, "our investigation indicates your vessel violated the exclusion perimeter." The energy discharge was defensive. Regrettable, but lawful. Monroe didn't turn. 2,000 civilians, Counselor. Families. Scientists. Children. The Dominion regrets the loss of life. That phrase, regrets the loss of life, echoed through the chamber. Sterile and rehearsed, the Council speaker, a translucent being from the Honor Consortium, shimmered as she spoke. "Ambassador Monroe, the Council has voted. Reparations will be issued. We ask that humanity refrain from retaliatory action." Retaliatory action. The word struck like cold iron. Monroe finally turned. His eyes were bloodshot, but his voice was controlled. "Madam Speaker, with respect, if Erebus had been a Grillian outpost and humans had fired first, would this chamber still be debating reparations?" No one answered. Across the circular floor, the representatives of the Thalorian Alliance avoided his gaze. The Zelkari emissary adjusted his breathing mask. The silence stretched, uncomfortable, accusing. Monroe exhaled slowly. "Then you've already made your decision." He walked out, his footsteps echoing against the marble alloy floor. The sound was swallowed by the chamber's silence. Earth orbit, 3 days later. The USS Vigilant drifted in the shadow of Luna's Terminator line, its hull dark against the stars. Inside, Captain Naomi Pierce stood at the observation deck, staring down at the blue curve of Earth. The news channels were chaos, public outrage, riots in Martian colonies, demands for justice for blood, and yet, the President's office had released nothing but calm statements about investigative cooperation with the Council. "Ambassador Monroe's shuttle just docked," said Lieutenant Aaron Park. Glancing up from his console, Pierce nodded. "Bring him to command." When Monroe entered, his uniform looked more like armor than fabric, creased, sleepless, and scorched by grief. "Captain," he said. "Sir." He looked around the room, the faint hum of systems filling the void. "How many ships are ready?" Pierce hesitated. 18 in the orbital fleet, 32 more under construction. But the Council's non-expansion treaty forbids armed mobilization. Monroe interrupted quietly. "I'm not asking about treaties, Captain. I'm asking about readiness." The question hung there. Pierce's jaw tightened. "We're ready." Monroe nodded once, as if confirming something already decided. He walked toward the viewport, watching the Earth's lights blink in the darkness. "Do you remember the first time we joined the Council?" "Of course," Pierce said. "We thought it meant peace." He turned to her, eyes hard. "Peace is just the pause between wars someone else decides for you." For a long moment, the hum of the ship's systems filled the room. Then, quietly, Monroe said, "Operation Dawnlight begins tonight." Pierce froze. "Sir, that would violate—" "It's not retaliation," Monroe said, cutting her off. "It's prevention." He handed her a sealed data pad. "Coordinates. Council traffic nodes, communications relays. We don't fire a shot. We silence them." Pierce looked at the data pad, then back at him. "If this gets out—" "It won't," Monroe said. "We'll make sure it never needs to." Outside, the Earth rotated slowly beneath them, blue, fragile, and unaware. Council Spire, Arun 9. Orbit, the chamber lights dimmed as new data scrolled across the main hologram. Council Speaker Anira's form flickered. "Communications outage detected across sectors 4 through 12, she said. "Traffic relays unresponsive. Possible solar interference." But the readings didn't match interference. They matched targeted suppression. Councillor Tirak Vesson slammed one clawed hand against the table. "This is sabotage! Who would dare?" The Anir's bioluminescent eyes pulsed with unease. "Who indeed?" Then, almost on cue, the chamber doors hissed open. A courier drone entered. Its signal tagged human diplomatic transmission. Anira gestured. The message unfolded in the air. An image of Elias Monroe standing in the dim light of a human warship. "To the Galactic Council," he said. "You asked us to stay our hand. You called justice revenge. You called survival aggression. So understand this, humanity will not kneel again. We will not wait for your permission to defend ourselves. Erebus was our beginning. What follows will be your reckoning." The message ended. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the first reports came in. Council defense grids going dark. Orbital stations offline. Power fluctuations rippling across border sectors. And somewhere, far beyond Arun 9's orbit, human ships moved in perfect silence, cutting through the void like blades. The council chamber filled with panicked voices. Anira tried to restore order, but the noise was drowned out by the growing realization that humanity, underestimated humanity, had just declared independence from the Galactic Order, and no one knew what they had unleashed. The first thing the Galactic Council noticed was the silence. No distress calls, no warnings, no military declarations, just systems blinking out. Sector after sector, entire communication lattices went dark, their relay stations inert, as though the vacuum itself had swallowed their voices. Within 12 hours, 8 trade routes were severed. Within 36, half the Council's information network was paralyzed. It wasn't destruction. It was disconnection. Human Strategic Command, Sublunar Facility, Earth Orbit. The air inside the command center hummed with low tension. Dozens of officers moved between consoles, quiet, focused, their screens reflecting the faint blue light of encrypted feeds. The atmosphere was that of a hospital operating room, calm, clinical, fatal. Ambassador Elias Monroe stood at the center table beside Captain Naomi Pierce. Both wore the dark insignia of the newly formed Human Defense Directorate, an organization whose existence had yet to be publicly acknowledged. "Status?" Monroe asked. Lieutenant Park's voice was steady. "Phase 1 complete. 17 council nodes offline. No casualties reported. All units confirm withdrawal." Monroe nodded, his expression unreadable. "And Phase 2? Pierce folded her arms. "Operational windows open in 6 hours. If we proceed, we'll blind the Dominion's long-range fleet sensors." "Then do it," Monroe said. Pierce hesitated. "Sir, once we move to Phase 2, there's no going back. This will be seen as an act of war." Monroe's eyes didn't waver. "Captain, the moment Erebus burned, the war began. We're just the first to admit it." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The orders were clear. Grillian Dominion, Outer Rim listening post. Inside a command sphere bathed in crimson light, the Grillian overseer clicked his mandibles in agitation. "Status report!" He barked in his guttural tongue. His aide, a smaller, trembling creature, hissed, "Long-range sensors unresponsive. Gravitic scans returning null signatures." "It's as if the entire human sector vanished." The overseer narrowed his eyes. "No fleet moves without trace. Find them." But when the technicians recalibrated the scanners, the holographic display filled with hundreds of blank returns, signatures deliberately scrambled, falsified. Human technology was crude compared to most council races. But this was something else. A hybrid of machine learning and stealth algorithms built from scavenged alien code, unrefined, but devastatingly effective. Council Spire, Arun 9, Orbit. The emergency session was chaos. Delegates shouted across the chamber, their voices overlapping in a desperate chorus. Council Speaker Anira slammed her luminescent hand against the dais. "Order! Maintain order!" Councillor Tarak Vessen's exoskeleton plates clicked with fury. "This is human aggression. They have violated every treaty they signed. We demand authorization for military response." The Thalorian emissary's voice quivered like reeds in the wind. "Military response to what? We can't even find them!" A massive hologram dominated the center of the chamber. Dozens of red sectors blinking offline, spreading outward like infection. Anira turned to her defense analyst. "Estimate?" The analyst's translucent form flickered. "If human operations continue at current efficiency, they could neutralize our outer communication web within 72 hours. "Impossible," hissed Tarak. "They don't possess that capability." The analyst's lights dimmed. "They do now." Anira's form dimmed as she looked across the chamber. "We created them. We taught them our systems, our protocols, and now they're using them better than we ever did." The council chamber fell silent. Even Tarak's fury couldn't fill the void. USS Vigilant, en route to neutral orbit, Captain. Naomi Pierce watched as the holographic projection of Earth shrank behind her ship. In front of her, the stars were littered with small golden beacons, drone interceptors, stealth relay ships, and orbital decoys forming a silent perimeter. It wasn't an offensive campaign. It was containment. The objective of Operation Dawnlight wasn't conquest. It was deterrence. To make every council world realize that humanity could dismantle their networks without ever firing a weapon. Pierce still hated it. She turned as Monroe approached. "You realize what you're doing?" she asked quietly. "Yes. You're proving we can be feared." He looked at her, the faint reflection of the stars in his eyes. "Fear is the only language they understand." Pierce shook her head. "That's not diplomacy. That's survivalism with a trigger." Monroe's jaw clenched. "Catherine used to say that. She believed we could coexist." "She was right," Pierce said. "Then why is she dead?" Monroe's voice cracked on the last word, though his posture never shifted. For a moment, the silence between them was heavier than space itself. Then Monroe spoke, softer. "You know what's funny? The council thought humanity was fragile. That because we bled easily, we'd bend easily. They mistook restraint for weakness." He looked back toward the viewport, his reflection sharp and cold. "They won't make that mistake again." Council Defense Command. The following day. A dozen fleets scrambled across council space. Massive dreadnoughts drifted into formation, their hulls bristling with weapon arrays. Defense grids activated in synchronized bursts. Scanning for invisible enemies, but humanity never came. Instead, their orbital banks began reporting anomalies, small fluctuations in their AI cores, command protocols rewriting themselves mid-cycle. Autonomous defenses turned inward, locking out their own operators. On one planet, a fleet of drone ships suddenly froze in mid-flight, then self-deleted their navigation data. No human vessel fired a single shot. They didn't need to. Across the galaxy, humanity had unleashed Project Mirror. Every piece of software they had traded, every maintenance AI humanity had licensed from the Council, contained a single buried line of code, written years ago, unnoticed, harmless, until now. That code gave humanity access to half the Council's defense systems, and now every alien world was staring at their own weapons, wondering when, or if, they would turn on them. Council Spire. Hours later, Anira's voice trembled as she addressed the emergency holofeed. "We have confirmed that human encryption now controls 27% of our defense grid." "They can shut us down at will," Councillor Tarak roared, his mandibles snapping. "Then strike them now. Burn their colonies before they move again." Another councillor hissed, "You fool! We can't see their fleets. Half our targeting arrays are offline. The chamber erupted in panic. Anira finally raised her hand. Enough! The chamber dimmed. She turned slowly toward the central hologram where Earth shimmered, small and distant. Send word to their representative, she said quietly. We will negotiate. The counselors fell silent. Even Tarak's rage faltered. Negotiate? He spat. Anira's glow dimmed. Yes, before humanity decides to finish what they started. Human Strategic Command. 2 days later. The Council's request came through encrypted channels, routed through 3 dead satellites and a relay hidden inside Saturn's magnetosphere. Naomi Pierce watched as the message appeared on her console. They want to talk, she said. Monroe didn't answer immediately. His eyes lingered on the holographic map of Council space, now riddled with silent sectors, each a testament to human precision. Finally, he exhaled. Set a location. Pierce glanced at him. And if it's a trap? Monroe smiled faintly, though there was no warmth in it. Then we'll show them what silence truly means. In the void between stars, humanity had done the impossible, not by overwhelming force, but by patience, code, and quiet revenge. They had turned the tools of civilization into weapons of terror. And now, for the first time in the Council's long history, the galaxy's oldest races feared a species barely a century off their home planet. But Monroe knew this was only the beginning, because once fear took root, it never stopped growing. The conference chamber orbiting Tau Epsilon Prime had once been neutral ground, a quiet diplomatic station built to host negotiations between warring factions. Now it drifted alone in the void, surrounded by both human and alien fleets, their weapons dormant but primed, their commanders watching in silence. Every eye in the galaxy was on this meeting. Inside the chamber, the light was dim, the air thick with tension. Ambassador Elias Monroe stood at one end of the table, his reflection faint in the polished surface. Across from him hovered Speaker Anira of the Anir Consortium, her translucent body flickering faintly under the artificial light. Beside her, Counselor Tarak Vesson of the Grillian Dominion loomed like a living fortress, his exoskeletal plates gleaming. Between them lay the remnants of an era, the Galactic Council Accords, etched in metal and crystal, cracked clean through. We came here to end this, Monroe said. His voice carried a restrained power, honed by weeks of sleepless resolve. Speaker Anira's glow dimmed. End this? You've blinded half the Council's infrastructure. Billions live without stable communication power or defense. You call that ending? Monroe's expression didn't change. I call it restraint. Tarak's mandibles clicked sharply. Restraint? You cripple our world, sabotage our fleets, and still claim to be civilized? Monroe's gaze shifted to him, unflinching. Erebus Station, 2,000 dead. You called it a defensive misunderstanding. That's when civilization ended. The Grillian leaned forward, chitin creaking. You think this makes you strong, human? You think the galaxy fears you? Monroe's tone was ice. They do now. Captain Naomi Pierce stood near the chamber's entrance, silent, observing. She had begged Monroe not to come here, but he had insisted. If peace is to mean anything, he'd said, it has to be earned in person. Now, as she watched him face down the galaxy's most powerful leaders, she wasn't sure if he was seeking peace or vindication. Anira gestured toward the cracked accords. Ambassador Monroe, the Council proposes a ceasefire. The Dominion will pay reparations, monitored by an impartial tribunal. In exchange, humanity ceases all interference in Council infrastructure. Monroe didn't answer. His gaze wandered across the viewport, the endless black sea of space, streaked with the faint outlines of ships on standby. He finally spoke. We didn't start this war, but we've shown we can end it. On our terms. Anira tilted her head slightly. Your terms? Monroe stepped closer, the gravity in his words undeniable. Recognition. Humanity is no longer a probationary member of the Council. We will hold equal authority, equal voting power, and full sovereign rights over our colonies. Tarak hissed. Outrageous! You threaten us into submission? Monroe cut him off, his voice razor-sharp. I warned you. You didn't listen. Now you'll listen because you're afraid. The chamber fell silent. Monroe placed a small device on the table, no bigger than a coin. It projected a rotating hologram of the Council's defense grid. One by one, sectors lit up red. Every major defense network you built runs on hybrid code, he said. Code humanity helped maintain. If I press this, those grids don't shut down. He paused. They delete themselves. A shudder rippled through the chamber. Even Anira's normally serene form flickered erratically. Tarak's claws flexed, a low growl rumbling from his chest. You would doom billions? Monroe didn't blink. I would make sure no one ever dooms us again. For a long moment, the galaxy teetered on the edge of annihilation. Every diplomat, every soldier, every watching world held its breath, and then Anira spoke softly. Ambassador Monroe, humanity has taught us something we had forgotten. Monroe frowned. And what's that? She met his gaze. Her voice, though calm, carried centuries of weariness. That fear is not power. It's decay. We built this council to end fear, and now we sit trembling because of it. You've reminded us that we are no better than the empires we swore to replace. She turned to Tarak. Withdraw your fleets! Tarak's mandibles snapped open in disbelief. You can't. I can, Anira said. And I will. The Dominion destroyed Erebus. The Dominion will face justice, but this chamber will not die in pride. Her light brightened, filling the room with pale blue radiance. We accept humanity's sovereignty. The silence that followed was absolute. Tarak stood motionless for several seconds, his breathing shallow. Then, with visible effort, he turned and stormed out, the sound of his heavy steps echoing through the hall. Anira looked back at Monroe. You've won, Ambassador. But I wonder, what will you do now that you've made the galaxy fear you? Monroe's expression softened, if only slightly. He turned off the hologram. The grid disappeared. What I should have done from the beginning, he said quietly. Build something worth the cost. Anira's glow dimmed. Then perhaps there's hope for you after all. Later, USS Vigilant. En route to Earth, the ship glided silently through the void, its engines a whisper against the cosmic background. In her command chair, Naomi Pierce watched the faint blue sphere of Earth growing larger on the main display. Monroe stood beside her, his reflection faint in the glass. The Council accepted, Pierce said. Monroe nodded slowly. At a price. She studied him. Was it worth it? He didn't answer immediately. Outside, the stars shimmered against the darkness, ancient, distant, indifferent. Finally, he said, Erebus deserved justice. Humanity deserved respect. But peace. He paused, his voice almost breaking. Peace isn't something you win. It's something you earn, and keep earning every day. Pierce turned to him. So what now? Monroe looked out at the stars, the same stars that had once seemed unreachable, now scarred by silent warfare. Now, he said softly, we start over. Without gods, without masters, just us, and the weight of what we've done. Council spire. Months later, Speaker Anira addressed the newly convened assembly. The banners of 12 civilizations, including humanity's, hung around the chamber. Today, she said, we acknowledge the end of the old order. The Galactic Council is no longer a council of dominance, but of survival. Humanity's retaliation taught us that power without humility leads only to fear, and that fear, left unchecked, will destroy us all. Across the chamber, the human delegation sat quietly listening. For the first time in centuries, the council floor was truly silent, not with fear, but with reflection. Earth, Arlington Space, Memorial. A gentle rain fell over the field of names etched into dark alloy. Erebus Station Memorial. Captain Naomi Pierce stood beside Ambassador Monroe as he placed a single white rose on the memorial stone. Do you ever wonder, she asked, what Catherine would have thought of all this? Monroe's eyes lingered on the engraving of her name. Every day. He straightened, looking out at the horizon where the storm clouds met the faint glimmer of orbital traffic above. She wanted peace, he said. Maybe this is the start of it. Pierce nodded quietly. And if it isn't? Monroe's voice was almost a whisper. Then we'll try again. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain and metal. Above them, a shuttle streaked silently across the sky. Not a weapon, but a courier bearing the new Council Charter for humanity's signature. The galaxy would remember the terror of humanity's retaliation, but it would also remember the silence that followed. The silence where something new began. And on that quiet Earth morning, Elias Monroe finally closed his eyes. For the first time since Erebus burned, there was peace.